All right, interesting. I was just looking at movie number 3, I think it is, where I talk about the build and how the build is going to go. Now you can see here the submarine where I'm up to. I'm at the stage where I've had it in the water, it's all trimmed, and I'm now trying to get it looking nice, and I'm going to go through a process of painting shortly and all of that. So it's all coming along very nicely. So from that movie where I said how I thought it was going to go, interesting question is what worked and what didn't. So the first thing I was going to do was to build the motors and make a direct drive out to the 2 propellers. That worked brilliantly. I had to fiddle around a bit getting the collet on the prop shafts done nicely, and in fact I ended up using, I think, 8 grub screws for every collet just to keep it all nicely balanced. But in fact that was a good move, and that all works really brilliantly. A problem that I had is that I was running a 25 amp fuse. That managed to blow up within 3 seconds of getting it on the water. Had to take it home, pull it all apart because they're hardwired in, and put a 40 amp fuse in. That's because I'm using a LiPo battery as well as direct drive motors. Props are great. The props that I made really make this thing hammer along, so I'm very happy with the whole combination. All of that worked very well. Now the placement of the ballast tank, that was interesting, because in the back of the hull, what I did really was I ended up building it so that the end cap was as close to the stern as I could get it, given the fact that the stern was getting narrower. And also, given the fact that the props are out like this, I had to make sure that the motors then would fit inside the watertight container. So that's basically what I was really concentrating on, getting everything as far stern as I could. That worked quite well, and then the next thing to do was, in this cylinder I wanted to put the LiPo battery. Now there was no room to move with that because the LiPo battery won't go under those motors, I discovered. So it had to go there, and I had to lengthen this cylinder. As you can see it here, it's this long. This is the motor room cylinder, and that took up a reasonable amount of room here. So the next step was to put the ballast tank in, and it was pretty much dictated by the fact that I have the pump on the end of this end cap here, and then there is the ballast tank. But in fact the positioning was just about right. I used my eye really to work out what is about the center of the boat in terms of its buoyancy, and then shifted it forward around about 5 centimeters, and that is in fact where it was. Now that just happened luckily. If this had been further back this way or further back this way, I would have either lengthened this. I couldn't shorten this other than by moving that battery and putting it somewhere else, which would have been a major issue. So that's basically how that happened, and that all worked pretty well. I struck a problem. I made the end caps and the control room component and the acrylic tube at some point cracked, and I had to replace it with Lexan, which meant that I had to replace the joining connector that I'd turned out on the lathe, because the Lexan's a different internal dimension. The external's pretty much the same. That was that. And then came the blow when I put it in the water. And remember I said I thought there was enough air in the boat to make it float? Well, only in the bow. In the stern it went straight down. So let me draw the boat and how it sort of looks. We've got this top part like that. It goes down like that. It's a bit of a caricature really. There's the bow. And the watertight cylinder fits in here like that, just joining it all together. I thought there'd be enough air in there to keep the boat up. Of course the motors are in the back, the battery's in the back. I've got this section here in the bow which is made of balsa, and I've got all of the hydroplane gear sitting in there, and of course there's the sail. Now what worked and what didn't? I put it in the water, and there wasn't enough air in the stern to outweigh the heavy motor mechanism, and it sank in the stern with the bow sticking up. So what I had to do was to put some foam, a block of foam really, into the stern and into this section here. And what that did was it kept the stern up, and then I could start trimming it properly. And when I trimmed it, now this is the interesting thing, when I trimmed it I discovered I'd made a significant mistake. And the significant mistake was putting balsa there. Now it helped to form the bow, but in fact it doesn't help in the trimming of a submarine. And you may ask, well, why is that the case? It's a very interesting question. Because what happened was, when I had the boat on the water, it was very clearly, I don't know whether that shows it, it was a bit bow heavy. It wasn't sitting up nicely. And yet you'd think it would be with balsa in, wouldn't you? There's the trick. You see, submarines are counterintuitive, because in fact, the way to shift the boat in the water is to take that balsa out and put more foam in the stern. Do you get that? Okay, let me explain. We don't trim a submarine for the surface. We trim a submarine to be neutrally buoyant when the water's above when it's fully submerged. Now, all of that balsa puts a fair amount of upward buoyancy, leverage into the boat. We've got some in the stern. So what we do to get the balance is we put lead in, and I put a fair amount of lead in there and some lead in there, and that's held the boat neutrally buoyant. Then you surface it, you empty the ballast tank, and of course what it notices when it's on the surface is that there's more lead here than there is lead there, so it's actually holding the bow down. Now what you do is, if you remove this balsa and put more foam in here, which is above the waterline for when it's on the surface, what happens when you put the boat underwater is there is more buoyancy here now, by demonstrating that by a longer line, less buoyancy here, so you need less lead here and more lead there, and then when you surface the boat it's like that. See? Interesting, it's counterintuitive, but it's the way it works. So the balsa up there was a mistake. Don't do that. Apart from that, it's all coming together really well, and I'm really excited about how it sits in the water. The power it's got is perfect, and it's not too bad at all.